I will never forget the weight of that gift bag in my hands. It was Christmas Eve, and I was standing on the sidewalk outside my son's house in Fairfield, Connecticut, holding presents I had spent weeks carefully selecting. The air was crisp and cold, the kind of December night that makes your breath visible and your cheeks flush pink. Preston's house looked beautiful from the outside, with tasteful white lights framing the windows and a wreath on the door that I recognized from the Williams-Sonoma catalog I had gifted Bryony last year. I was early. I am always early. It is a habit from my years in real estate, when showing up 10 minutes before a meeting meant the difference between closing a deal and losing a client. But as I approached the front steps, something unexpected happened. A hand touched my shoulder, gentle but urgent. I turned to find Eugene Holbrook standing behind me. Eugene was Preston's neighbor, a retired literature professor in his late 60s with kind blue eyes behind thick-framed glasses. Over the years, I had exchanged pleasantries with him whenever I visited. He always complimented my coat or asked about my garden, the sort of neighborly kindness that feels increasingly rare these days. But tonight, his face held an expression I had never seen before. It was not kindness. It was something closer to dread. "Evangeline," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, do not go in through the front door." I blinked at him, confused. "Eugene? What do you mean?" He glanced nervously toward the house, then back at me. His hands were trembling slightly, and I noticed he was not wearing a coat despite the freezing temperature. He must have rushed outside the moment he saw me arrive. "I know this sounds strange," he continued, "but I need you to trust me. Go around the back, enter through the kitchen door, and please do not make a sound until you understand what is happening inside." My heart began to pound. "Eugene, you are scaring me. Is something wrong? Is Preston hurt?" He shook his head slowly, and the pity in his eyes made my stomach drop. "No one is hurt. Not physically. But Evangeline, you need to hear what they are saying about you before they know you are there. I would not be able to sleep tonight if I let you walk into that house unprepared." I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand an explanation. But something in his voice, some desperate sincerity, made me stop. Eugene Holbrook was not a dramatic man. He was a widower who spent his days reading Dickens and tending to his rose bushes. If he was standing outside in the freezing cold, begging me to sneak into my own son's home, something was terribly wrong. "How do you know something is happening?" I asked. He looked away, embarrassed. "I heard them planning it. Bryony was on the phone in the garden a few days ago, talking to a friend. She did not realize how sound carries over the fence. I heard everything, Evangeline. Everything they intend to do tonight." My grip tightened on the gift bag. Inside was a Cartier watch for Preston, the same model his father used to wear. Inside was my mother's pearl necklace for Bryony, a peace offering I had been saving for the right moment. Inside was a check for $50,000, a Christmas gift to help with the kitchen renovation Bryony had been talking about for months. What are they planning? My voice came out smaller than I intended. Eugene met my eyes. "I think you need to see for yourself. Some things cannot be explained. They must be witnessed." So I went. I walked around the side of the house, my expensive heels sinking into the thin layer of snow that covered the grass. The backyard was dark, illuminated only by the warm glow spilling from the kitchen windows. I could hear music playing inside, something jazzy and festive. I could hear voices, laughter. The kitchen door was unlocked. Of course it was. Bryony always left it unlocked when they were expecting guests, a habit that drove Preston crazy, but that she refused to change. I slipped inside as quietly as I could, setting down my gift bag on the counter. The kitchen was immaculate, all white marble and stainless steel, decorated with sprigs of holly and cinnamon-scented candles. It looked like something from a magazine. I moved toward the hallway that connected the kitchen to the dining room, staying close to the wall, barely breathing. The voices grew louder. I recognized Preston's baritone, then Bryony's higher pitch, then other voices I did not know. They must have invited friends. That was fine. That was normal for a Christmas dinner. But then I heard what they were saying. "She should be here any minute," Bryony announced, her voice carrying clearly through the partially open door. "Everyone remember the plan. We let her get comfortable. We let her hand out her ridiculous, expensive gifts, and then Preston delivers the speech. I still cannot believe you are actually doing this," a woman's voice said, laughing. Filming an intervention for your mother-in-law? That is savage. It is not an intervention, Preston replied, and hearing my son's voice say those words made my chest physically hurt. It is a liberation. Tonight, I finally tell her the truth, that I am done pretending to be grateful for her constant manipulation, that her money does not buy her the right to control my life. There was a murmur of approval from the group. Someone clinked glasses. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. My legs felt like they might give out. This could not be happening. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Should we really be recording this, though? A man's voice asked, sounding slightly uncomfortable. It seems kind of cruel. That is exactly why we need to record it, Bryony responded smoothly. Preston has been trying to set boundaries with his mother for years, and she always manipulates him into backing down. Having documentation of this moment will help him stay strong. Plus, I want her to see the video later. I want her to understand that she cannot buy people's love. I heard Preston sigh. Bryony is right. My mother thinks she can throw money at every problem and make it disappear. She gave us the down payment for this house, and she has never let me forget it. Every time I try to make a decision about my own life, she has an opinion. Every holiday, every birthday, she shows up with gifts that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and I am supposed to fall at her feet in gratitude. Poor baby, someone cooed sarcastically, and the group laughed. I know it sounds ridiculous, Preston continued, but you do not understand what it is like growing up as Evangeline Blackwell's son. Every teacher, every coach, every person I have ever met immediately knows who my mother is. I have never been Preston. I have always been Evangeline's boy, the one whose mommy bought his way through life. Bryony's voice cut in. And she is still doing it. Do you know she deposits $3,000 into our account every single month? She calls it helping with expenses. I call it keeping Preston on a leash. So give the money back, the uncomfortable man suggested. We tried, Bryony said, her voice dripping with false martyrdom. She gets so hurt, so wounded, that Preston always caves. She is a master manipulator. She makes you feel like the villain for not accepting her generosity. I closed my eyes. Tears were sliding down my cheeks, but I made no sound. I could not make a sound. I needed to hear all of it. I needed to understand exactly what my son thought of me. What are you going to say in the speech? The laughing woman asked. I have been practicing for weeks, Preston said, and I could hear him moving around the room, probably pacing like he always did when he was nervous. I am going to thank her for coming. Then, I am going to explain that her constant financial support has actually been harmful to my development as an independent adult. I am going to tell her that I need space to build my own life, and that means she needs to stop the monthly deposits, stop the extravagant gifts, and stop expecting to be invited to every family event. What about the inheritance? Someone asked. Are you worried she will cut you out? There was a pause. Then Bryony laughed. Oh, she would never. Evangeline is too obsessed with appearances. She would never admit to anyone that her relationship with her son is anything less than perfect. She will cry. She will play the victim, but she will never actually follow through on any consequences. That is the thing about people like her. They need to be needed. Taking away the money would mean admitting she failed as a mother. I heard Preston agree. My own son, agreeing that I was too weak, too desperate, too pathetic to ever hold him accountable. Besides, Bryony added, she has another daughter. If Evangeline cuts Preston out, it will look like she is playing favorites. Her precious image would never survive the scandal. They laughed again. All of them, laughing at me, laughing at the woman who had given Preston everything, who had worked 18-hour days building a business so he could have the best schools, the best opportunities, the best life I could possibly provide, who had held him when he cried after Theodore died, promising him that he would never be alone as long as I was alive. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. My makeup was certainly ruined, but it did not matter. Nothing about my appearance mattered anymore. What mattered was the choice I was about to make. For 34 years, I had been the kind of mother who gave everything. When Preston struggled in school, I hired tutors. When he crashed his first car at 17, I bought him another one. When he chose a career path that would never make him wealthy, I supported him without question. When he married a woman who clearly despised me, I smiled and wrote a check for their honeymoon. I thought I was being loving. I thought generosity was the same as care. I thought that if I just gave enough, did enough, sacrificed enough, eventually he would see how much I loved him. But standing in that dark hallway, listening to my son describe me as a manipulative, controlling, pathetic woman who used money as a weapon, I finally understood the truth. My love had not been received as love. It had been received as obligation. Every gift I gave was not a blessing, but a burden. Every check was not support, but a chain. And worse, they were right about one thing. I had never held him accountable. I had let Preston treat me poorly for years, always making excuses, always hoping the next gesture would be the one that finally earned his respect. I had been so desperate to maintain the illusion of a close family that I had tolerated behavior I would never accept from anyone else. That ended tonight. I thought about what I had in my purse. My phone, which I had used that morning to authorize a $50,000 transfer to Preston's account as an early Christmas gift. My keys to the house in Greenwich, the house I had built with Theodore, the house that represented everything I had worked for. My lipstick, my reading glasses, my wallet containing credit cards with no limit because I had earned that privilege through decades of hard work. I thought about what I had given Preston over the years. The exact number was burned into my memory because I had recently calculated it while updating my will. $847,000. That was how much I had invested in my son's life since he turned 18. College tuition, apartment deposits, car payments, the house down payment, monthly support, wedding expenses, birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, random checks sent just because I was thinking of him. $847,000, and he was in that room calling me pathetic. Something shifted inside me. It was not anger exactly. It was something colder, something clearer. For the first time in my life, I saw my son not as the baby I had rocked to sleep, not as the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, but as a grown man who had made a choice. He had chosen to believe his wife's narrative over his own memories. He had chosen to interpret my love as manipulation. He had chosen to invite strangers to witness my humiliation. And now I was going to make a choice too. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The $50,000 transfer was still pending. With 2 taps, I canceled it. Then I opened my contacts and sent a text to my attorney, Marcus Chen, whom I had known for 20 years. I need to revise my will immediately. Call me tomorrow morning. I checked my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. My mascara had run. My eyes were red, but my spine was straight, and my hands had stopped shaking. I was Evangeline Blackwell. I had built a $12 million real estate empire from nothing. I had negotiated with men who thought a woman had no place in business. I had buried my husband, survived my grief, and kept going because that is what strong women do. I was not going to let my own son break me. I took a deep breath, adjusted my cashmere coat, and walked toward the dining room door. The conversation inside continued, oblivious to my presence. They were still laughing, still planning their ambush, still congratulating themselves on their clever scheme. I pushed the door open and stepped into the light. The room fell silent instantly. Preston was mid-sentence, a wine glass in his hand, his face frozen in an expression of pure shock. Bryony sat at the head of the table, surrounded by 3 couples I had never met, all of them staring at me with varying degrees of horror and embarrassment. Someone was holding a phone, clearly positioned to record. I looked at my son. I looked at the man I had sacrificed so much for, the child I had loved more than my own life, and I saw a stranger. Worse than a stranger. I saw a coward. "Please," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Do not stop on my account." I believe Preston was about to give a speech. The silence in that dining room stretched for what felt like an eternity, but my mind was already traveling backward, sifting through decades of memories, trying to understand how we had arrived at this moment. As I stood there watching my son's face cycle through shock, guilt, and something that looked almost like defiance, I found myself thinking about the woman I used to be. The woman who had built everything from nothing and somehow still ended up here, being mocked by her own child on Christmas Eve. My name is Evangeline Blackwell, and I turned 58 years old last March. I was born in a small apartment in Newark, New Jersey, to parents who worked double shifts just to keep food on the table. My father drove a delivery truck. My mother cleaned office buildings at night. They never complained, never made me feel poor. But I knew from a very young age that I wanted something different. I wanted security. I wanted to never worry about whether the electricity would be shut off or whether we could afford new shoes for school. I started working at 16, saving every penny I earned from my job at the local pharmacy. I put myself through community college, then transferred to Rutgers on a partial scholarship and a mountain of student loans. By 24, I had a degree in business administration and a job as a secretary at a real estate firm in Manhattan. The pay was terrible, but I watched and I learned. I stayed late. I asked questions. I studied how the agents talked to clients, how they negotiated deals, how they turned charm and persistence into signed contracts. By 29, I had my own real estate license and a small office in Connecticut. By 35, I employed 12 agents. By 45, Blackwell Luxury Properties was one of the most respected names in the tri-state area, specializing in high-end residential sales. I built that company with my own hands, my own sweat, my own sleepless nights. No one gave me anything. Every dollar I earned through work that would have broken most people. Along the way, I met Theodore Blackwell. He was a cardiologist at Yale New Haven Hospital, brilliant and gentle, and so different from the aggressive businessmen I encountered every day. He asked me to dinner 6 times before I finally said yes. I was too busy building my empire to think about romance. But Theodore was patient. He understood ambition because he had it too, and he never once made me feel like I should choose between my career and a family. We married when I was 30. Preston came along when I was 32, and Imogen followed 3 years later. Those years were a blur of board meetings and school plays, of closing deals during the day and reading bedtime stories at night. I will not pretend I was a perfect mother. I missed things. I was late to soccer games. I forgot to sign permission slips. There were nights when the nanny put my children to bed because I was stuck in negotiations that could not wait. But I loved them. God, how I loved them. Every sacrifice I made, every hour I worked, was for them. I wanted my children to have the security I never had. I wanted them to grow up knowing that they would always be taken care of, that their mother had built something that would protect them forever. Theodore understood this. He was my partner in every sense of the word. When I felt guilty about working too much, he reminded me that I was teaching our children the value of ambition and hard work. When I doubted myself, he told me that Preston and Imogen were lucky to have a mother who showed them what a strong woman could accomplish. He was my anchor, my safe harbor, and when he died 6 years ago, I lost more than a husband. I lost the only person who truly knew me. The heart attack came without warning. Theodore was 58 years old, the same age I am now, and he had just finished his morning run. He collapsed in our kitchen, and by the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. I held his hand as the paramedics worked on him, knowing in my heart that it was already too late. The man who had loved me for 28 years, who had believed in me when I did not believe in myself, was gone in an instant. The grief nearly destroyed me. For months, I could barely function. I handed over the daily operations of my company to my senior partners and spent my days wandering through our empty house, touching Theodore's things, sleeping in his shirts because they still smelled like him. My children were supportive at first. Preston flew in from Connecticut, where he had recently moved with his new girlfriend. Imogen took a week off from her job in Boston. They sat with me, held me while I cried, promised me that we would get through this together. But grief is a selfish thing, and eventually, life demands that people move on. Preston returned to his job. Imogen went back to Boston. I was left alone in a house full of memories, trying to figure out who I was without the man who had defined so much of my adult life. I coped the only way I knew how. I worked. I threw myself back into the business, closing deals with a ferocity that surprised even my most seasoned agents. And I gave. I gave money, time, attention, anything I could think of to maintain my connection to my children. The monthly deposits to Preston's account started a few months after Theodore died. I told myself it was practical, a way to help him establish himself. But the truth was simpler and sadder. I was trying to buy his presence in my life. I was trying to make myself indispensable so he would never leave me the way Theodore had. Preston had always been different from Imogen. Where my daughter was warm and straightforward, my son was complicated. He struggled in school despite being intelligent. He changed majors 3 times in college. He drifted through his 20s without any clear direction, taking jobs that bored him and quitting when they became too demanding. I made excuses for him. I told myself he was finding himself, that he needed time, that not everyone blooms early. When he met Bryony Hale 4 years ago, I was initially hopeful. She was beautiful and ambitious, a freelance interior designer who talked about her work with genuine passion. I thought maybe she would be the motivation Preston needed to finally settle down and build something meaningful. I offered to pay for their wedding, and when Bryony politely declined, saying they wanted something small and intimate, I respected her wishes. I offered to decorate their new home as a gift, and when she refused that too, I told myself she was simply independent. But the signs were there, even then. The way Bryony looked at me when she thought I was not paying attention, the subtle comments about how Preston needed to learn to stand on his own, the gradual cooling of our relationship, from polite warmth to barely concealed hostility. I ignored all of it because I wanted so desperately for my son to be happy. I told myself that Bryony was protective of her marriage, that she saw me as a threat because I was a strong personality. I never considered that she might genuinely despise me. The monthly deposits continued. The extravagant gifts continued. Every time I visited, I brought something expensive because I did not know how else to show love. It is a flaw, I recognize that now. Growing up with nothing taught me that material things equal security, and security equals love. I could not separate the two. When I gave Preston a new watch, I was saying I love you. When I wrote a check for their vacation, I was saying, I want you to be happy. When I transferred $3,000 into their account every month, I was saying, please do not forget about me. But Preston did not hear those messages. Or maybe he heard them too clearly and resented the implication that he could not provide for himself. Bryony certainly heard them that way. To her, every gift was evidence that I thought my son was incapable, that I was inserting myself into their marriage, that I was trying to maintain control through financial dependence. The truth is somewhere in the middle, I suppose. I did want to help. I did want to be generous. But I also wanted to be needed. After Theodore died, my children were all I had left. The thought of losing them, too, of becoming one of those elderly women who only sees her family on holidays, terrified me more than anything. So I gave and gave and gave, hoping that my generosity would keep them close. Instead, it pushed Preston away. And Bryony, whether through genuine belief or calculated manipulation, convinced him that my love was actually control, that my gifts were actually chains, that the mother who had sacrificed so much for him was actually the villain of his story. Standing in that dining room, looking at the faces of strangers who had been invited to witness my humiliation, I understood all of this with painful clarity. I saw the narrative Bryony had constructed, and I saw how perfectly it fit Preston's own insecurities. He had always struggled with being my son, with living in the shadow of my success. Bryony had given him permission to transform that struggle into resentment, and resentment into cruelty. But understanding did not mean accepting. Understanding did not mean I had to stand there and let them execute their plan. I had spent my entire life being underestimated by people who thought they knew my limits, competitors who assumed a woman could not succeed in real estate, clients who talked down to me until they saw my sales numbers, colleagues who dismissed my ideas until those ideas made them rich. Every single one of them had been wrong about me, and my son was about to learn that he was wrong too. I looked around the dining room at the elaborate Christmas decorations, the expensive wine bottles, the catered food that I was certain Bryony had charged to the credit card Preston could not actually afford. I looked at the strangers who shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly aware that they had signed up for something uglier than they anticipated. I looked at Bryony, whose face had settled into an expression of defiant composure, clearly calculating her next move. And then I looked at Preston, my son, my firstborn, the baby I had held in my arms 34 years ago, promising him that I would always protect him, always love him, always be there for him. He could not meet my eyes. He stared at his wine glass, at the table, at anywhere but my face. And in that moment, I felt something I had never felt toward my child before. I felt pity, not for myself, but for him, because he had chosen to believe a lie about his own mother. He had chosen to let his wife orchestrate a public humiliation rather than having an honest conversation. He had chosen cruelty over courage, and that choice revealed something about his character that no amount of money could fix. The woman I was an hour ago would have cried. She would have begged for an explanation, pleaded for understanding, probably apologized for whatever she had done wrong. That woman was desperate to be loved, even by people who did not deserve her love. But that woman had died in the hallway, listening to her son call her pathetic. The woman standing in this dining room was someone new, someone who had finally learned that love without respect is worthless, and generosity without boundaries is just another form of self-harm. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile I used to give competitors who thought they could outmaneuver me, the smile that preceded every major victory of my career. "Well," I said, my voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence, "since I seem to have interrupted the evening's entertainment, perhaps I should contribute something to the festivities." I watched the panic spread across the room like a wave. The 3 couples Bryony had invited exchanged nervous glances, clearly realizing they had stumbled into something far more serious than a quirky family intervention. One woman, a redhead in an expensive green dress, was already reaching for her purse, calculating how quickly she could escape. Her husband placed a restraining hand on her arm, frozen in that particular paralysis of people who do not want to make a scene. But I was done worrying about scenes. I had spent my entire life managing my image, being polished and appropriate, saying the right things at the right times. Where had it gotten me? Standing in my son's dining room, discovering that he had invited an audience to watch him humiliate me. "Mom," Preston finally managed, his voice cracking slightly on the word, "this is not what it looks like." I almost laughed. Almost. But laughter felt too generous for this moment. "Really?" I replied, keeping my tone conversational, almost pleasant. "Because what it looks like is that you invited me to Christmas dinner so you could ambush me with a speech about what a terrible, controlling mother I am. It looks like your wife organized this little gathering specifically so there would be witnesses. And it looks like someone over there was planning to record the whole thing on their phone." The man holding the phone quickly lowered it, shoving it into his pocket as if it had burned him. Bryony stood up from her chair, smoothing her cream-colored blouse with deliberate calm. She was beautiful, I had to admit, polished in that specific way of women who spend hours cultivating an appearance of effortless elegance. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her expression carefully composed into something resembling concern. "Evangeline," she said, using my first name as she always did. Never Mom, never even Mrs. Blackwell. "I understand you are upset. Anyone would be. But maybe this is actually a good thing. Maybe now we can finally have an honest conversation about the dynamics in this family." "The dynamics in this family," I repeated slowly. "You mean the dynamic where I have supported my son financially for over a decade, and in return, he invited strangers to watch him call me pathetic?" Preston flinched at the word. Good. He should flinch. He should feel every syllable of what he said about me. "That is not fair," he protested. "You did not hear the full context. We were just venting. Everyone vents about their parents." "Venting," I said. "Is that what we are calling it?" "Preston, I heard you say that my generosity was actually manipulation. I heard Bryony say that I was too obsessed with appearances to ever hold you accountable. I heard your guests laughing about how savage it was to film an intervention for your mother-in-law." I paused, letting the words land. "Does that sound like venting to you, or does it sound like a coordinated attack?" One of the other women at the table, a blonde with nervous eyes, cleared her throat. "Maybe we should go," she said to her husband. "This seems like a private family matter." "Oh, please stay," I said, and my voice was sweet enough to cause cavities. "You came all this way to watch the show. It would be rude of me to deny you the entertainment you were promised." The blonde woman's face went red. Her husband stood up abruptly. "We are leaving. Preston, Bryony, this was a mistake. We should never have agreed to this." "David, sit down," Bryony snapped, and there it was. the steel beneath her polished exterior. The real Bryony, the one who had orchestrated this entire evening, finally showing her face. Nobody is leaving until we resolve this. Actually, I said, David and his wife are welcome to leave whenever they want. This is not their family, and this is not their fight. But before anyone goes anywhere, I have a few things I would like to say. I walked further into the room, and the guests parted around me like I was carrying something contagious. I stopped at the head of the table, directly across from Bryony, and rested my hands on the back of an empty chair. 34 years ago, I began. I gave birth to a baby boy. I was in labor for 22 hours. Theodore held my hand the entire time, telling me I was strong, telling me I could do this. And when they finally placed Preston in my arms, I made a promise. I promised that I would give my son everything I never had: security, opportunity, love without conditions. Preston shifted uncomfortably. Mom, please do not do this. Do what? Tell the truth? I thought that is what tonight was about. Honest conversations about family dynamics. I let the sarcasm drip from every word. So let me be honest. Let me tell your friends exactly what kind of mother I have been. I turned to address the remaining guests, who looked like they wanted to sink through the floor. When Preston was 8 years old, he struggled with reading. His teachers suggested he might have a learning disability. I hired the best specialists in Connecticut, drove him to tutoring sessions 3 times a week, sat with him every night practicing phonics until he finally caught up with his classmates. Cost me about $15,000 and more hours than I can count. That is not relevant, Bryony interjected. When Preston was 16, I continued, ignoring her, he crashed his car into a telephone pole. He had been drinking at a party, something he had promised me he would never do. I could have let him face the consequences. Instead, I hired a lawyer, paid for the damages, and bought him another car because I believed in second chances. Mom, stop. Preston's voice was strained. When Preston graduated from college with a degree he had no intention of using, I did not criticize. When he changed jobs 4 times in 3 years, I did not judge. When he announced he was going to marry a woman who had made it abundantly clear that she despised me, I smiled and offered to pay for the wedding. I never said I despised you, Bryony cut in, but her voice lacked conviction. You did not have to say it. Every look, every comment, every polite refusal of my attempts to welcome you into this family said it for you. I finally looked at her directly. I gave you my mother's pearls as an engagement gift. Do you remember what you did with them? Bryony's composure flickered. I do not know what you are talking about. You returned them. You took them to the jeweler I bought them from and exchanged them for store credit. Did you think I would not find out? Harold has been my jeweler for 20 years. He called me the same day, confused and apologetic. The room went very still. Preston stared at his wife. You told me you lost them. I did not want to wear something that came with strings attached, Bryony said, but her voice had gone defensive. Everything your mother gives comes with expectations. The only expectation, I said quietly, was that you would treat them with respect because they belong to my mother. A woman who cleaned offices at night so her daughter could go to college. A woman who never owned anything valuable in her entire life except those pearls, which my father saved for 2 years to buy her. But you are right, Bryony. They came with strings. They came with the string of family history and sentimental value. I can see how that would be burdensome for you. Preston put his head in his hands. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to come to me when he was overwhelmed, seeking comfort and guidance. But he was not a little boy anymore. He was a grown man who had made choices, and those choices had led us here. Why did you not tell me? He asked his wife. About the pearls? Because it does not matter, Bryony replied, but her voice was rising, losing its careful control. Because your mother uses gifts as weapons, and I refuse to play her game. Do you know she deposited $50,000 into our account this morning? Without asking, without discussing it, just decided we needed her money. That was a Christmas gift, I said, which I've already canceled. Preston's head snapped up. What do you mean, canceled? I mean that while I was standing in the hallway listening to you describe me as a manipulative, pathetic woman who cannot accept that her son is a grown adult, I opened my banking app and reversed the transfer. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. See? Transaction canceled. Consider it my first step toward respecting your boundaries." Bryony's face went pale. I watched her do the math, calculating how that money had already been mentally allocated, probably toward the renovation she had been planning or the vacation she had been researching. "You cannot just take back a gift," she said. "It was not a gift yet. It was a pending transfer. And given what I have learned tonight about how my generosity is perceived, I think it is best if I stop enabling your husband's dependence on me." I smiled at her. "Is that not what you wanted? For Preston to stand on his own 2 feet?" "This is exactly what I am talking about," Bryony said, turning to the remaining guests as if seeking allies. "Do you see how she operates? She gives with one hand and takes away with the other. She uses money to control everyone around her." "I have never taken anything from Preston," I replied calmly. "Every dollar I have given him has been given freely, with no expectation of repayment. The only thing I ever wanted in return was to be treated with basic respect. Apparently, that was too much to ask." The redhead in the green dress stood up. "We really need to go. I am so sorry, Evangeline. We did not know this was going to happen. Bryony told us it would be a gentle conversation about boundaries, not this." "And you believed her?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You believed that a gentle conversation about boundaries required an audience and a camera phone?" The woman had no answer. She collected her purse and her husband, and they hurried out the door without looking back. The blonde couple followed close behind, murmuring apologies that I barely acknowledged. That left me, Preston, Bryony, and one final couple, a dark-haired man and woman who seemed frozen in place, unable to decide whether leaving or staying would be more awkward. "Marcus and Jennifer," Bryony said, her voice tight, "you do not have to go." "Actually, I think we do," the man said. He looked at me with something like sympathy. "I am sorry, Mrs. Blackwell. This was not right." And then they were gone too, leaving the 3 of us alone in a dining room decorated for a celebration that would never happen. Bryony turned on Preston immediately. "Say something. Do not just stand there." But Preston was looking at me, really looking, and for the first time all evening I saw something besides guilt and defiance in his eyes. I saw fear. He was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake, and he had no idea how to fix it. "Mom," he said slowly, "I know you are angry. You have every right to be angry. But can we please sit down and talk about this like adults?" "Like adults," I repeated. "You want to talk like adults now? After planning a public humiliation with your wife? After inviting strangers to watch you denounce your own mother? After calling me pathetic while your friends laughed? I should not have said that. I was venting. I did not mean it." "Then what did you mean, Preston? Help me understand, because I have spent 34 years trying to be a good mother to you, and apparently I have failed so spectacularly that you needed to stage an intervention." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like Theodore that my heart clenched despite my anger. "It is complicated. You do not understand what it is like to be your son. You are so successful, so competent, so in control of everything. And I am just me, average, unremarkable. Every time you give me money, every time you swoop in to fix my problems, it reminds me that I cannot do anything on my own. So, instead of talking to me about this, instead of saying, 'Mom, I need some space,' you decided to ambush me at Christmas dinner?" "Bryony thought it would be better to have support. She said you would manipulate me if we were alone, that you would cry and make me feel guilty, and nothing would change." I looked at Bryony, who had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "And you believed her? You believed that your own mother, who has never once tried to manipulate you, would use tears as a weapon?" "You do cry," Preston said weakly. "Every time we have a difficult conversation, you cry, and then I feel terrible, and then nothing changes. I cry because I love you, and it hurts when you pull away from me. That is not manipulation, Preston. That is being human. That is being a mother who loves her son and does not understand why he keeps pushing her away." Bryony stepped forward, inserting herself between us. "This is exactly what I predicted. She is already turning this around, making herself the victim. Preston, do not fall for it. Be quiet," I said, and my voice was cold enough to freeze the wine in the glasses on the table. "You have done enough damage tonight. Let me speak to my son. He is my husband, And he was my son long before he was your husband. I was there when he took his first steps. I was there when he lost his first tooth. I was there when his father died, and he cried in my arms for 3 hours straight. Where were you, Bryony? Where were you during the 26 years before you decided to take him away from his family? I did not take him away. I helped him see the truth about you. The truth. I laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. Let me tell you some truth. In the 4 years since you married my son, you have systematically isolated him from his family. You refused my wedding gift. You returned my mother's pearls. You discouraged Preston from visiting on holidays, always finding some excuse why it was not a good time. You have been planning this night for months, grooming my son to see his mother as an enemy. That is not true, Preston protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it not? When was the last time you called me without Bryony in the room? When was the last time you visited me alone? When was the last time you made a decision about our relationship without consulting her first? He could not answer. We both knew the answers, and they proved my point. I am not going to stand here and be interrogated, Bryony announced. Preston, either you support me or you support her. It is time to choose. And there it was. The ultimatum that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. Bryony had orchestrated this entire evening to force Preston into a public declaration of loyalty. She wanted him to choose her over me, in front of witnesses, on camera, so he could never take it back. I looked at my son. My heart was breaking, but I kept my face composed. Preston, I am not going to ask you to choose between your wife and your mother. That is not fair to anyone, and it is not the kind of relationship I want with you. Then what do you want? He asked, and he sounded so lost, so confused, that I almost felt sorry for him. I want you to think about the man you have become. I want you to ask yourself if this is really who you want to be. Someone who ambushes his mother at Christmas. Someone who lets his wife dictate his relationships. Someone who takes and takes and takes, and then resents the person who gave him everything. I do not resent you, he said, but the words were hollow. Yes, you do, and maybe that is my fault. Maybe I gave too much, too freely, without teaching you the value of what you were receiving. Maybe I should have let you struggle more, let you fail, let you learn that life does not come with a safety net. I took a deep breath. But I cannot change the past. I can only change the future. What does that mean? Bryony demanded. I looked at her, really looked, and I saw exactly what she was. Not evil, exactly. Just deeply insecure, deeply afraid of losing the one thing she thought gave her value, her control over my son. She had grown up watching her parents lose everything, and she had vowed never to be that vulnerable. Preston was her security, and I was the threat to that security. In another life, I might have pitied her. Tonight, I simply wanted her out of my way. It means, I said, that I am done. I am done giving money to people who see it as manipulation. I am done giving love to people who see it as control. I am done trying to earn a place in my son's life when his wife has made it clear that there is no place for me. Preston's face crumpled. Mom, please. The monthly deposits stop immediately. The inheritance I had planned for you will be redirected to your sister and to charities I believe in. If you want money in the future, you will earn it yourself, like I did. And if you want a relationship with me, you will have to work for that too. Because I am done being the only one who tries. I turned to leave, then stopped. There was one more thing I needed to say. Preston, I love you. I will always love you. You are my son, and nothing can change that. But love without respect is worthless, and you have shown me tonight that you do not respect me at all. So I am going to give you what you asked for. Space, independence, freedom from your controlling mother. I met his eyes. I hope it makes you happy. I really do. But I suspect you are going to discover that the life Bryony has planned for you is a lot harder than the life I was trying to give you. And with that, I walked out of the dining room, leaving my son and his wife standing in the wreckage of their perfect plan. I made it as far as the kitchen before I heard footsteps behind me. For a moment, I thought it might be Preston, finally coming to his senses, ready to apologize and beg for forgiveness. But the footsteps were too light, too quick. It was Bryony. You think you have won, she said, her voice low and venomous. You think walking out makes you the bigger person, but all you have done is prove everything I told Preston about you. I picked up the gift bag I had left on the counter. The Cartier watch was still inside, along with the check I had planned to give them. I removed the check and tore it in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the pristine marble floor. What exactly did I prove, Bryony? That you use money as punishment, that you withdraw love when you do not get your way, that everything you give comes with conditions. She crossed her arms, a posture of defiance that reminded me of a child throwing a tantrum. Preston needed to see this. He needed to understand who you really are. I considered her for a long moment. She was trembling slightly, though whether from anger or fear I could not tell. Her carefully constructed plan had fallen apart, and she was scrambling to salvage something from the wreckage. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" I asked quietly. "I do not care what you see. I see a frightened woman. A woman who grew up watching her parents lose everything and swore she would never be that vulnerable. A woman who found a man from a wealthy family and decided he was her ticket to security." I paused, watching her face tighten. "I see a woman who is so afraid of being abandoned that she has to eliminate anyone who might compete for her husband's loyalty. You do not know anything about me. I know more than you think. I know your parents declared bankruptcy when you were 16. I know you worked your way through design school while your friends were partying. I know you have exactly 3 regular clients for your interior design business, and 2 of them are friends who feel sorry for you." I watched her flinch at each truth. "I know you have been living off my monthly deposits to Preston while pretending you do not need anyone's help. How do you know all of that?" "Because I am not stupid, Bryony. When my son announced he was marrying you, I did my research. I wanted to understand the woman who was going to be part of my family, and what I found was someone who had worked incredibly hard to overcome a difficult childhood, someone who should have been an ally, not an enemy." For just a moment, something shifted in her expression, a crack in the armor, but it closed quickly, replaced by the familiar hostility. "If you knew all that, why did you not say anything?" "Because I hoped you would learn to trust me. I hoped you would see that I was not a threat, that I only wanted to love my son and his wife and eventually my grandchildren. I gave you time. I gave you space. I gave you every opportunity to accept me." I shook my head slowly. "But you could not do it. You could not let go of your fear long enough to see that I was on your side. You were never on my side. You were always trying to control Preston, to keep him dependent on you. I was trying to help him. There is a difference." "Is there?" Bryony stepped closer, her voice rising. "You gave him money every month. You bought this house. You paid for everything. How is that not control?" "Because I never asked for anything in return. I never threatened to take it away. I never used it as leverage." I met her eyes steadily. "Until tonight. Tonight I learned that my generosity was being used as evidence against me. So yes, now I am taking it away. Not as punishment, but as protection. I will not continue to fund people who see my love as manipulation." From the dining room, I heard Preston call out, "Bryony? Mom? What is happening?" Neither of us answered. We stood in the kitchen, 2 women who had been circling each other for 4 years, finally having the conversation we should have had long ago. "What do you want?" Bryony finally asked, and for the first time she sounded genuinely uncertain. "What would it take for you to forgive this?" It was a good question. An hour ago, I would have said an apology, a sincere acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a promise to do better. But standing here now, looking at the woman who had orchestrated my humiliation, I realized that forgiveness was not what I wanted. At least, not yet. "I want my son back," I said simply. "Not as a dependent, not as a financial obligation, but as a son who loves his mother and treats her with respect. I want to have a relationship with him that is not filtered through your insecurities. I want to be invited to Christmas dinner without worrying that I am walking into an ambush. And if I cannot give you that, then you will have Preston all to yourself, just like you wanted." I picked up my gift bag, now considerably lighter. "But I wonder, Bryony, if you have thought about what that really means. Without my financial support, how long before the cracks start to show? How long before Preston realizes that you have isolated him from everyone who loves him? How long before he looks at you and sees not a partner, but a prison?" Her face went white. I had struck something deep, some fear she had been carrying that I had only guessed at. "He loves me," she whispered. "Maybe he does, but love built on isolation and manipulation has a way of turning into resentment. I should know. I have watched it happen tonight." Preston appeared in the doorway, his face drawn and anxious. "What are you two talking about? Mom, please do not leave like this. We need to talk." I looked at my son, and despite everything, despite the betrayal and the humiliation and the harsh words, I still loved him. I would always love him. That was the curse of motherhood. Your children could break your heart into 1,000 pieces, and you would still pick up every fragment and keep them safe. "We will talk," I said, "but not tonight. Tonight, you need to think about what you have done. You need to decide what kind of man you want to be and what kind of relationship you want with your mother." I walked toward the back door, pausing with my hand on the handle. "When you are ready to have an honest conversation, one without ambushes or audiences or ultimatums, you know where to find me." "Mom," his voice cracked on the word. "I love you, Preston. I always will. But I am done accepting crumbs when I deserve a seat at the table." And then I walked out into the cold December night, leaving my son standing in the kitchen with the wife who had tried to destroy me. Eugene Holbrook was waiting on his front porch, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. When he saw me emerge from the back of the house, he stood up slowly, his face creased with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. I considered the question. Was I all right? My son had betrayed me. My daughter-in-law had tried to humiliate me. My carefully constructed family had revealed itself to be built on foundations of resentment and manipulation. But I was still standing. I was still Evangeline Blackwell, and I had just proven, to myself if no one else, that I was stronger than anyone had given me credit for. "I will be," I said. "Would you like to come inside for some tea? I find myself in need of company." Eugene smiled, a warm and gentle expression that reminded me there was still kindness in the world. "I would like that very much," he said. Eugene's kitchen was nothing like the sleek, magazine-perfect space I had just left. It was small and cluttered, with mismatched mugs hanging from hooks and a calendar on the wall still showing the wrong month. But it was warm, and it smelled like cinnamon, and when Eugene handed me a cup of chamomile tea, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for hours. "I hope I did the right thing," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "Warning you, I mean. I debated with myself for days. It felt like meddling, but I could not stand the thought of you walking into that trap unprepared. You did the right thing," I assured him. "I would rather know the truth than live in comfortable ignorance." He nodded slowly, wrapping his hands around his own mug. "My wife used to say that. Eleanor. She passed 3 years ago. Cancer." He said it matter-of-factly, the way people do when they have lived with grief long enough that it becomes simply another fact of their existence. "I am sorry." "Thank you. She was a good woman, strong, like you. She would have done exactly what you did tonight. Walked in there with her head high and refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break." I took a sip of my tea, letting the warmth spread through me. "I'm not sure I handled it well. I said things I probably should not have said. I made threats about the inheritance that I will now have to follow through on. Do you regret it?" I thought about the question seriously before answering. "No. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my son became the kind of person who would do this to his mother. But I do not regret standing up for myself. I have spent too many years trying to buy love from people who were never going to give it freely." Eugene studied me with those kind blue eyes. "May I ask you something personal? After tonight, I think we are past formalities. When your husband died, what was the hardest part?" The question caught me off guard. I had expected him to ask about Preston, about Bryony, about what I planned to do next. Instead, he was asking about Theodore, and somehow that felt more intimate than anything else we had discussed. "The silence," I said finally. "Theodore and I used to talk about everything. Our days, our worries, our dreams for the children. After he died, I would come home to this enormous house, and there was just nothing. No one to share my thoughts with. No one to tell me I was being too hard on myself, or not hard enough." I paused, surprised by the tears that were suddenly threatening. I think I started giving Preston money because I was trying to fill that silence. If I could not have Theodore, at least I could have my children's gratitude. At least I could feel needed. Eugene nodded, as if this made perfect sense to him. Eleanor and I never had children. We wanted them, tried for years, but it was not meant to be. After she died, I thought I would drown in the loneliness. This house felt like a tomb. He gestured at the cluttered kitchen. I started collecting things, books, kitchen gadgets, anything to fill the empty spaces. It took me a long time to realize that things cannot replace people. No, they cannot. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who understood loss in ways that did not require explanation. "What will you do now?" Eugene asked. "I do not know," I admitted. Part of me wants to follow through on every threat I made. Change my will, cut Preston off completely, let him experience what life is like without his mother's safety net. I set down my teacup. But another part of me knows that would only prove Bryony right. She has been telling him for years that I use money as a weapon. If I retaliate financially, I become exactly the villain she painted me as. That is quite a dilemma. It is. And the worst part is, there may not be a right answer. Whatever I do, someone will see it as proof that they were right about me. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out and saw Preston's name on the screen. He had sent a text message. "Mom, please come back. We need to talk. I'm sorry." I stared at the words, trying to parse their sincerity. Was this genuine remorse, or was it the panic of a man who had just realized his financial support was about to disappear? With Preston, it was becoming increasingly difficult to tell the difference. "Your son?" Eugene guessed. "Yes, he wants me to come back." "Are you going to?" "Not tonight. He needs to sit with what happened. If I go running back the moment he apologizes, nothing will change. He will learn that he can treat me however he wants, as long as he says sorry afterward." Eugene smiled slightly. "You are wiser than you give yourself credit for." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was not Preston. It was Imogen, my daughter, calling from Boston. I answered immediately. "Mom, what is going on? Preston just called me in hysterics. He said you showed up at dinner and everything went wrong and you are cutting him out of your will?" I took a deep breath. Of course Preston had called Imogen. Of course he was already trying to marshal allies, to spin the narrative in his favor. "That is not quite what happened," I said. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" "I am at home. Connor is out with friends. Mom, you are scaring me. What is going on?" So I told her. I told her about the invitation, about Eugene's warning, about sneaking in through the back door and hearing my own son describe me as pathetic. I told her about the confrontation, about Bryony's manipulation, about the things I said and the threats I made. Through it all, Imogen listened in silence. "I knew it," she finally said when I finished. "I knew something like this was going to happen. Bryony has been poisoning him against you for years, and Preston is too weak to see it." "You knew?" I suspected. Every time I talked to Preston, he would make these little comments about how you were too involved, how your generosity made him feel inadequate. I tried to tell him he was being ungrateful, but he would get defensive and change the subject. She paused. "I should have warned you. I am sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. This is not your fault. But I could have done something. I could have confronted Bryony, or talked to Preston more seriously, or at least given you a heads up that things were worse than you realized. Imogen, you live in Boston. You have your own life, your own marriage. It is not your job to manage your brother's behavior. Maybe not, but you are my mother, and I hate that this happened to you, especially on Christmas Eve." I felt the tears coming again, but this time they were not entirely from sadness. There was gratitude mixed in, relief at being reminded that not all my children had turned against me. "I love you, sweetheart. I love you too, Mom. Do you want me to come down? I can be there by tomorrow afternoon." "You do not have to do that. I want to. Connor will understand. You should not be alone right now." I looked across the table at Eugene, who was pretending to be very interested in his tea. "Actually, I am not alone. A kind neighbor has taken me in for the evening." "A neighbor?" "His name is Eugene. He was the one who warned me about what Preston and Bryony were planning. I am having tea in his kitchen right now." There was a pause. "Mom, are you telling me that a strange man saved you from an ambush and now you are in his house?" I laughed, despite everything. When you put it that way, it does sound like the plot of a movie. But Eugene is not strange. He is a retired professor who lost his wife a few years ago. He is just being kind. Eugene raised his eyebrows at me, amused. Well, Imogen said slowly, I suppose that is better than sitting alone in your house on Christmas Eve. But I am still coming down tomorrow. I need to see for myself that you are okay. I would like that. We talked for a few more minutes, making plans for her visit before I finally hung up. Eugene was watching me with a gentle expression. Your daughter sounds like a good person. She is. She has always been the steady one. Preston got all the drama. I sighed. I used to think that was because of how I raised them. I gave Preston more attention because he struggled more. I thought I was being a good mother by focusing on the child who needed me most. But maybe all I did was teach him that he could demand my energy without earning it. You cannot blame yourself for your son's choices. He is a grown man. At some point, he became responsible for his own character. I know. But it is hard not to wonder what I could have done differently. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Preston. Mom, I mean it. I know I messed up. Please let me explain. And then another. Bryony is upset. She says you said terrible things to her. And another. I need to know if you were serious about the will. That's not fair to punish me for one mistake. I read the messages twice, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. There it was. The real concern, buried under the apologies. He was worried about the money. He was worried about his inheritance. Even now, after everything, he was calculating the financial implications of his betrayal. Bad news? Eugene asked. My son is more concerned about his inheritance than about our relationship. I showed him the messages. He says I am not being fair, punishing him for one mistake. Eugene read the texts and shook his head slowly. One mistake. As if planning a public humiliation is the same as forgetting a birthday. That is Preston. He has always had a gift for minimizing his own behavior while magnifying everyone else's. I used to think it was immaturity. Now I am starting to think it is just who he is. I typed out a response, choosing my words carefully. We will talk when you are ready to take responsibility for what happened tonight. Until then, I need space. His reply came almost instantly. I am taking responsibility. I said I was sorry. What more do you want? I stared at the screen for a long moment. What did I want? I wanted my son to understand why what he did was wrong. I wanted him to see me as a person, not as a bank account with maternal obligations. I wanted him to choose me over Bryony, just once, to prove that I still mattered to him. But I was beginning to realize that wanting those things did not mean I would ever get them. I am going to turn off my phone, I said to Eugene. I cannot have this conversation over text, and I do not have the energy for it tonight. That sounds wise. I powered down my phone and slipped it back into my purse. The silence that followed was profound, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had said what needed to be said and were content to simply exist in each other's company. You know, Eugene said after a while, Christmas Eve is supposed to be a time for hope, for believing that things can be better than they are. I am not sure I have much hope left tonight. Maybe not for Preston. But what about for yourself? He leaned forward slightly. You said earlier that you spent years trying to buy love from people who were never going to give it freely. But that means you have also spent years ignoring the love that was already there. What do you mean? Your daughter dropped everything to come see you tomorrow. She did not hesitate, did not make excuses. That is love, Evangeline. Real love, given freely. He smiled. And if you will forgive an old man for being presumptuous, I think you have more people in your corner than you realize. You just have to be willing to see them. I considered his words. He was right, of course. I had been so focused on earning Preston's approval that I had neglected the relationships that did not require earning. Imogen had always been there, steady and supportive, and I had taken her for granted because she did not demand my attention the way her brother did. When did you become so wise? I asked. Grief teaches you things, mostly about what matters and what does not. He stood up and carried our empty mugs to the sink. It is getting late. You are welcome to stay here tonight if you do not want to drive home. I have a guest room that has not been used in years, but the sheets are clean. The offer was unexpectedly touching. This man, whom I barely knew, was showing me more kindness in one evening than my own son had shown in years. Thank you, Eugene. But I think I need to go home. I need to be in my own space, with my own things around me. I stood up and gathered my purse. But I would like to see you again. Perhaps for coffee, when the holidays are over? His face brightened. I would like that very much. I pulled on my coat and paused at the door. Eugene, why did you warn me tonight? You could have stayed out of it. It was not your family, not your problem. He was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Because Eleanor would have wanted me to. She believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it was none of your business. He shrugged. And because you reminded me of her, the way you carried yourself when you visited Preston, the dignity, even when Bryony was rude to you. Eleanor would have liked you. I felt tears prick my eyes again, but I blinked them back. Thank you. For everything. Merry Christmas, Evangeline. Merry Christmas, Eugene. I walked out into the cold night, my breath making clouds in the air. The snow had started falling again, soft and silent, covering the world in white. Preston's house was dark now, the festive lights turned off, the celebration abandoned. I did not look at it as I walked to my car. The drive home took 40 minutes. I spent most of it in silence, not even turning on the radio. I needed to think. I needed to process everything that had happened and decide what came next. By the time I pulled into my driveway in Greenwich, I had made several decisions. First, I would follow through on changing my will. Not as punishment, but as protection. Preston had made it clear that he saw my money as his birthright, something he was entitled to regardless of how he treated me. That sense of entitlement needed to end. Second, I would give Preston space, real space, not the performative distance I had maintained while still sending monthly checks. If he wanted independence from his controlling mother, I would give it to him completely. No more deposits, no more extravagant gifts, no more rushing to fix his problems. Third, I would invest in the relationships that mattered. Imogen, who loved me without conditions. Eugene, who had shown me that kindness still existed in the world. The friends I had neglected while pouring all my energy into Preston. And finally, I would learn to love myself the way I had loved my children. Unconditionally, completely, without requiring anything in return. It was not going to be easy. 34 years of habits do not disappear overnight. But standing in my empty house on Christmas Eve, I made myself a promise. I was done being the mother who begged for crumbs. From now on, I would be the woman who demanded a seat at the table. And if that table did not have room for me, I would build my own. I spent Christmas Day alone, and it was not as terrible as I had feared. I made myself a simple breakfast, watched old movies on television, and ignored the 17 text messages from Preston that accumulated throughout the day. Each one was a variation of the same theme, apologies mixed with justifications, remorse undermined by resentment. He was sorry, but I had overreacted. He felt terrible, but I had said cruel things to Bryony. He wanted to fix things, but I needed to meet him halfway. I did not respond to any of them. Imogen arrived the day after Christmas, bursting through my front door with a suitcase in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. She wrapped me in a hug that lasted a full minute, neither of us speaking, just holding on. "I am so sorry, Mom," she finally said, pulling back to look at me. "I should have been there. I should have protected you. You are here now. That is what matters." We spent the next 3 days together, talking and crying and laughing at the absurdity of it all. Imogen helped me go through the boxes of photographs I kept in the attic, pointing out how even in pictures from years ago, Bryony always seemed to be positioned between Preston and me, a physical barrier that I had never consciously noticed. "She's been doing this from the beginning," Imogen said, holding up a photo from Preston's wedding. "Look at her hand on his arm. She is literally pulling him away from you." I thought she was just nervous about the photographer. "Mom, you always think the best of people. It is one of your greatest strengths and your biggest weakness." On the third day, I called my attorney. Marcus Chen was understanding but direct, as he always was. He advised me to take some time before making any permanent changes to my estate. "You are angry right now, Evangeline, and you have every right to be. But decisions made in anger are rarely decisions you want to live with. This is not anger, Marcus. This is clarity. My son has shown me exactly how he views our relationship, and I need to respond accordingly. In the end, we reached a compromise. I did not cut Preston out entirely. Instead, I restructured my will so that his inheritance would be held in trust, managed by Marcus, and released only under certain conditions. He would receive a modest monthly stipend, enough to cover basic expenses, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle Bryony had become accustomed to. The bulk of my estate would go to Imogen, with significant portions allocated to the charitable foundation I decided to establish in Theodore's name. The hardest part was stopping the monthly deposits. For 10 years, I had transferred $3,000 to Preston's account on the first of every month. It had become automatic, as natural as breathing. But on January 1st, for the first time in a decade, I did not make the transfer. I sat at my computer, finger hovering over the button, and I chose myself instead. Preston's reaction was immediate and predictable. He called 17 times in one day. He sent emails demanding to know what was happening. Bryony left a voicemail that started sweet and turned vicious when she realized I was not going to pick up. "You think you can control us by withholding money," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "But all you are doing is proving that I was right about you all along." I saved the voicemail, not because I intended to use it against her, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted a record of who these people really were, so I would not be tempted to convince myself I had imagined it. The divorce papers arrived 6 months later. I learned about it from Imogen, who had maintained minimal contact with her brother despite everything. Preston and Bryony were separating, citing irreconcilable differences. The real story, according to the rumors that filtered through mutual acquaintances, was that the financial pressure had finally broken them. Without my monthly support, Preston's salary could not sustain Bryony's expectations. She had wanted the renovation, the vacations, the lifestyle she had married into. When it became clear that Preston could not provide those things on his own, her love had evaporated like morning dew. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction at the news. I wish I could say I experienced the vindication that every wronged mother deserves. But mostly, I just felt sad. Sad for Preston, who had gambled on the wrong woman and lost. Sad for the grandchildren I would never have, because Bryony had always found excuses to delay starting a family. Sad for the relationship that might have been, if only my son had seen me clearly. Preston reached out a few weeks after the divorce was finalized, not through text this time, but through a handwritten letter. It was the first real communication we had in months, and I read it sitting in my garden, surrounded by the roses that Theodore had planted 20 years ago. "Dear Mom," it began, "I do not know if you will read this. I would not blame you if you threw it away, but I needed to try." He wrote about the divorce, about the shame he felt, about the long nights alone in the house I had helped him buy. He wrote about therapy, which he had started 3 months earlier at Imogen's insistence. He wrote about the things he was learning, about patterns of behavior and childhood wounds, and the ways we hurt the people we love without meaning to. "I am not asking for money," he wrote. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am just asking for a chance to prove that I can be the son you deserved all along. I know it will take time. I know I have to earn your trust, but I am willing to do the work, if you are willing to let me try." I read the letter 3 times before I responded. My reply was short, just a few lines, but it took me an hour to write. "Dear Preston, I read your letter. I am glad you are in therapy. I am sorry about your divorce, even though I know you may not believe that. I am not ready to see you yet, but I am open to the possibility. When you are ready to have an honest conversation, one without ambushes or excuses, you know where to find me. I love you. I always will." Mom, it was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation, but it was a door left slightly open, and for now, that was enough. In the year that followed, I built a new life. The Theodore Blackwell Foundation distributed its first grants to cardiac research programs across the country. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping domestic abuse survivors build financial independence. Eugene and I became close friends, sharing dinners and long conversations about literature and life and loss. He never tried to be Theodore. He was simply himself, and that was exactly what I needed. Imogen gave birth to a baby girl in October. They named her Eleanor, after Eugene's late wife, a gesture that made the old professor weep with joy when we told him. I was there for the delivery, holding my daughter's hand as she brought new life into the world. When they placed my granddaughter in my arms, I felt something I had not felt in years: pure, uncomplicated hope. Preston and I had coffee last month. It was awkward and painful and occasionally wonderful. He looked different, older, like a man who had finally stopped running from himself. We did not talk about the Christmas Eve incident. We did not need to. We talked about Eleanor, about his new apartment, about the job he had taken at a non-profit that paid half what his old position did, but made him feel like he was contributing something real. "I am sorry, Mom," he said at the end, and for the first time, I believed him. "I know you are. Can we try again?" Slowly, I looked at my son, really looked, and I saw both the man he had become and the boy he used to be. I saw his father's eyes and my mother's stubbornness, and something entirely his own, something that had been buried under years of resentment but was finally starting to emerge. "Slowly," I agreed. "Today, I am 59 years old. I live in the house Theodore and I built together, but it no longer feels like a mausoleum. It feels like a home, filled with memories of the past and hope for the future. I have a daughter who loves me, a granddaughter who lights up when she sees me, and a son who is learning how to be a son again. I have also learned something important about love. Real love is not about giving until you have nothing left. It is not about earning approval or buying affection. Real love is about seeing people clearly, accepting them as they are, and choosing to stay anyway. But it is also about seeing yourself clearly and refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. That Christmas Eve, I walked into my son's house expecting a celebration and found a betrayal instead. But in losing what I thought I had, I found something far more valuable. I found myself.